As finally revised, the article, written under my byline, stated the following points as the conclusions reached by True. 1. For the past 175 years, the Earth has been under systematic close-range examination by living, intelligent observers from another planet. 2. The intensity of this observation, and the frequency of the visits to the Earth's atmosphere, have increased markedly during the past 2 years. 3. The vehicles used for this observation and for interplanetary transport by the explorers have been classed as follows. The intensity
Type
of this
1,
observation,
a small
and the
non-pilot
carrying
disc-shaped
Earth's
craft
atmosphere
equipped with some form
have
of television
increased
or
markedly
impulse
during the past 2
transmitter.
years. Type 2, a very large, metallic, disc-shaped aircraft operating on the helicopter principle. Type 3, a dirigible-shaped, wingless aircraft that, in the Earth's atmosphere, operates in conformance with the Prandtl theory of lift. 4. The discernible patterns of observation and exploration shown by the so-called flying discs varies in no important particular from well-developed American plans for the exploration of space, expected to come to fruition within the next 50 years. There is reason to believe, however, that some other race of thinking beings is a matter of 2¼ centuries ahead of us. Following these points, I added a brief comment on the possibility of guided missiles, adding that the Air Force had convincingly denied this as an explanation of any sightings. As Purdy had suggested, I carefully omitted 10 minor cases that I thought might be linked with guided missile research. If disclosing the facts about space travel helped to divert attention from any secret tests, so much the better. True accepts the official denial of any secret device, I stated, because the weight of the evidence, especially the worldwide sightings, does not support such a belief. Most readers, of course, would know that some guided missile experiments were going on, and that True was fully aware of it. But our main purpose would be achieved. The fact that the Earth had been observed by beings from another planet would be fully presented. Some readers, of course, would reject even the fact that the saucers existed. Others would cling to the idea that they were of earthly origin. But the mass of evidence would make most readers think. At the very least, it would plant one strong suggestion, that we, men and women of the earth, are not the only intelligent species in the universe. When the article was finished, it was tried out on True's staff, then on a picked group that had not known about the investigation. One editor summed up the average opinion. It will cause a lot of discussion, but the way it's written, it shouldn't start any panic. The January issue, in which the story ran, was due on the stands shortly after Christmas. With my family, I had gone to Ottumwa, Iowa, to spend the holidays with my mother and sister. While I was there, the story broke unexpectedly on radio networks. Frank Edwards, Mutual Network newscaster, led off the radio comment. He was followed by Walter Winchell, Lowell Thomas, Morgan Beatty, and most of the other radio commentators. The wire services quickly picked it up. Some papers ran front-page stories. The publicity was far more than I had expected. I phoned a reporter in Washington whose beat includes the Pentagon. The Air Force is running around in circles, he told me. They knew your story was due, but nobody thought it would raise such a fuss. I think they're scared of hysteria. They're getting a barrage of wires and telephone calls. That night, as I was packing to rush back east, he called with the latest news. They're going to deny the whole thing, he said. But I heard one press branch guy say it might not be enough. They're trying to figure some way to knock it down fast. Next day, while changing trains at Chicago, I saw the Air Force statement. The press release was dated December 27, 1949. Without mentioning True, the Air Force flatly denied having any evidence that flying saucers exist. After examining 375 reports, the release said Project Saucer had found that they were caused by 1. Misinterpretation of various conventional objects. 2. A mild form of mass hysteria or war nerves. 3. Individuals who fabricate such reports to perpetrate a hoax or to seek publicity. Evaluation of the reports of unidentified flying objects, said the Air Force, demonstrates that they constitute no direct threat to the national security of the United States. Then came the clincher, Project Saucer, said the Air Force, had been discontinued, now that all the reports had been explained. It was plain that the release had been hastily prepared. It completely contradicted the detailed Project Saucer report, issued 8 months before, that had called for constant vigilance, after admitting that most important cases were unsolved. Anyone familiar with this situation would see the discrepancy at once. From Washington I flew to New York, where I found True in a turmoil. Long-distance calls were pouring in. Letters on flying saucers had swamped the mail room. Reporters were hounding Purdy for more information. A hurried analysis of the first 100 letters showed a trend that later mail confirmed. Less than 5% of the readers ridiculed the article. Between 15 and 20% said they were not convinced. A few of these admitted they could not refute the evidence. About half the readers accepted the possibility. Most of these said they saw no reason why other planets should not be inhabited. The remainder, between 25 and 30%, said they were completely convinced. Even the disbelievers asked for more information. The intelligence level of the average letter was gratifyingly high. Comments came from scientists, engineers, airline and private pilots, college professors, officers of the armed services, and a wide variety of others, including far more women than True's readership usually includes. Several confidential tips had come in when I arrived. Most of them were from usually reputable sources. We were given evidence that Project Saucer was still in operation, since its true code name was not Saucer. It could be continued without violating the Air Force press release. This same information was received from a dozen sources within the next 2 weeks. We were also told that there had been 722 cases, instead of 375. Meantime, a number of astronomers had come out with statements, pro and con. One of these was Dr. Dean B. McLaughlin, of the University of Michigan. "No one knows what the saucers are as yet," Dr. McLaughlin said. "They could be anything, and I'm willing to be convinced once the evidence is presented." Dr. Bart J. Bach of Harvard was on the fence. "After all," he said, "all sort of things float around in space. But I'm not convinced the saucers are anything apart from the Earth." Another Harvard astronomer, Dr. Armin J. Deutsch, took an oblique poke at True and me. "I don't think anyone, and that includes astronomers, knows enough about them to reach any conclusions." After this came the comment of Dr. Karl F. von Weizsäcker, that billions of stars may have planets, and many could be inhabited. Within a few days we had a huge stack of clippings, some supporting True, some deriding us. In the midst of all this, I read scientists' comments on Einstein's new unified field theory, which had been printed about the time True appeared on the stands. A discussion by Lincoln Barnett, author of The Universe, and Dr. Einstein, explained the basic premise that gravitation and electromagnetic force are inseparable. As I read it, I thought of what Redl had said. If gravitation were a manifestation of electromagnetic force, was it possible that an advanced race had found a way, as unique as splitting the atom, to offset gravity and utilize that force? It was during these first tense days that we ran down the White Sands story. This also ended another puzzle, the identity of the magazine that we had feared might scoop us. The race had been closer than we knew. The editors of a national magazine had learned of Commander McLaughlin and the sightings at White Sands. Two of the staff had carefully investigated the details. Convinced that the report was accurate, they had planned to run the story in an early issue. Since True had appeared first with the space travel story, the editors agreed to release the McLaughlin report for use in our March issue. The basic facts were in close agreement with what Redl had told me. The ellipsoid-shaped saucer had been tracked at a height of 56 miles, its speed 5 miles per second. This was 18,000 miles per hour, even faster than Redl had said. The strange craft, 105 feet in length, had climbed as swiftly as Marvin Miles had described it, an increase in altitude of about 25 miles in 10 seconds. Commander McLaughlin stated in his article that he was convinced the object was a spaceship from another planet, operated by animate, intelligent beings. He also described two small circular objects, about 20 inches in diameter, that streaked up beside a Navy high-altitude missile. After maneuvering around it for a moment, both disks accelerated, passed the fast-moving Navy missile, and disappeared. It is Commander McLaughlin's opinion that the saucers come from Mars. Pointing out that Mars was in a good position to see our surface on July 16, 1945, he believes that the flash of the first A-bomb, at Alamogordo Base, a point not far from White Sands, was caught by powerful telescopes. During the first week of January, I appeared on We the People with Lieutenant George Gorman. When I saw Gorman before rehearsals, he seemed oddly constrained. I had a feeling that he had been warned about talking freely. During rehearsals, he changed his lines in the script. When the writers argued over a point, Gorman told them, "I can say only what was in my published report, nothing else." The day before the broadcast, a program official told me they had been told to include the Air Force denial in the script. That afternoon, I learned that the Air Force planned to monitor the broadcast. Meantime, an AP story carried a new Air Force announcement. Formerly secret project, Saucer, files would be opened to newsmen at the Pentagon, giving the answers to all the saucer reports. Just after my return to Washington, I saw an INS story that was widely printed. It was an interview with Major Jerry Boggs, a Project Saucer intelligence officer who served as liaison man between Wright Field and the Pentagon. Major Boggs had been asked for specific answers to the Mantell, Childs-Whitted, and Gorman cases. The answers he gave amazed me. I picked up the phone and called the Air Force Press Branch. After some delay, I was told that Major Boggs was being briefed for assignment to Germany. An interview would be almost impossible. "He wasn't too busy to talk with INS," I said. "All I want is 30 minutes. Later, Jack Shea, a civilian press official I had known for some time, arranged for the meeting. I was also to talk with General Sari Smith, Deputy Director for Air Information. Major Jesse Stay, a press branch officer, took me to General Smith's office for the interview. Both Jesse and Jack Shea, pleasant, obliging chaps who had helped me in the past, tried earnestly to convince me the saucers didn't exist. Jesse was still trying when Major Boggs came in. Boggs looked to be in his 20s, younger than I had expected. He was trim, well-built, with a quietly alert face. 2 rows of ribbons testified to his wartime service. When Jesse Stay introduced me, Boggs gave me a curiously searching look. It could have been merely his usual way of appraising people he met. But all through our talk, I had a strong feeling that he was on his guard.
I had written out some questions, but first I mentioned the INS story. "Were you quoted correctly on the Mantell case?" I asked. "Yes, I was." Major Boggs looked me squarely in the eye. "Captain Mantell was chasing the planet Venus." It was so incredible that I shook my head. Major, Venus was practically invisible that day. "We've checked with astronomers." Is that the official Air Force answer? "Yes, it is," Boggs said. His eyes never left my face. I glanced across at General Sari Smith, then back at the intelligence major. That's a flat contradiction of Project Saucer's report. Last April, after they had checked for 15 months, they said positively it was not Venus. It was still unidentified. Boggs said in a slow, unruffled voice, "They rechecked after that report." Why did they recheck, after 15 months? I asked him. They must have gone over those figures long before that, for errors. If my question annoyed him, Boggs gave no sign. "There's no other possible answer," he said. Mantell was chasing Venus. Chapter 17. For a moment after Boggs's last answer, I had an impulse to end the interview. I had a feeling I was facing a sphinx, a quiet, courteous sphinx in an Air Force uniform. I was sure now why Major Jerry Boggs had been chosen for his job, the all-important connecting link with the project at Wright Field. No one would ever catch this man off guard, no matter what secret was given him to conceal. And it was more than the result of Air Force intelligence training. His manner, his voice carried conviction. He would have convinced anyone who had not carefully analyzed the Godman Field tragedy. I made one more attempt. Do the Godman Field witnesses, Colonel Hicks and the rest, believe the Venus answer? "I haven't asked them," said Boggs, "so I couldn't say." "What about the Chiles-Whitted case?" I asked. "You were quoted as saying they saw a meteor, a bolide that exploded in a shower of sparks." "That's right," said Boggs. "And Gorman was chasing a lighted balloon." Again the intelligence major nodded. I pointed out that all three of the cases mentioned had been listed as unidentified in the April report. "They'd had those cases for months," I said. "What new facts did they learn?" Boggs said calmly, "They just made a final analysis, and those were the answers." We looked at each other a moment. Major Boggs patiently waited. I began to realize how a lawyer must feel with an imperturbable witness. And Boggs's unfailing courtesy began to make me embarrassed. "Major," I said, "I hope you'll realize this is not a personal matter. As an intelligence officer, if you're told to give certain answers..." He smiled for the first time. "That's all right, but I'm not hiding a thing. There's just no such thing as a flying saucer, so far as we've found out." "We've been told," I said, "that Project Saucer isn't closed, that you just changed its code name." "That's not so," Boggs said emphatically. "The contracts are ended, and all personnel transferred to other duty." Then the announcement wasn't caused by True's article. Both General Smith and Major Jesse Stay shook their heads quickly. Boggs leaned forward, eyeing me earnestly. As a matter of fact, we'd finished the investigation months ago, around the end of August, or early in September. We just hadn't got around to announcing it. "Last October," I said, "I was told the investigation was still going on. They said there were no new answers to the cases just mentioned." "The press branch hadn't been informed yet," Boggs explained simply. "It seems very strange to me," I said. In April, the Air Force called for vigilance by the civilian population. It said the project was young, much of its work still underway. Jesse Stay interrupted before Boggs could reply. Don, the press branch will have to take the blame for that. The report wasn't carefully checked. There were several loose statements in it. This was an incredible statement. I was sure Jesse knew it. But the case reports you quoted came from right field. As of April 27, 1949, all the major cases were officially unsolved. Then in August or early September, the whole thing's cleaned up, from what Major Boggs says. That's pretty hard to believe. No one answered that one. Major Boggs was waiting politely for the next question. I picked up my list. The rest of the interview was in straight question and answer style. Q. Do you know about the White Sands sightings in April 1948? The ones Commander R. B. McLaughlin has written up. A. Yes, we checked the reports. We just don't believe them. Q. One of the witnesses was Charles B. Moore, the director of the Navy Cosmic Ray Project at Minneapolis. He's considered a very reputable engineer. Did you know he confirms the first report, the one about the saucer 56 miles up, at a speed of 18,000 miles per hour? A. Yes, I knew about him. We think he was mistaken, like the others. Q. Mr. Moore says it was absolutely sure it was not hallucination. He says it should be carefully investigated. A. We did investigate. We just don't believe they saw anything. Q. Could I see the complete file on that case? Also on Mantell, Gorman, and the Eastern Airlines cases. A. That's out of my province. Q. If Project Saucer is ended, then all the files should be opened. A. Well, the summaries have been cleared, and you can see them. Q. No, I mean the actual files. Is there any reason I shouldn't see them? A. There'd be a lot of material to search through. Each case has a separate book, and some of them are pretty bulky. Q. There were 722 cases in all, weren't there? A. No, nowhere near that. Q. Then 375 is the total figure. I mean the number of cases Project Saucer listed. A. There were a few more, something over 400. I don't know the exact figure. Q. I've been told that Project Saucer had the Air Force put out a special order for pilots to chase flying saucers. Is that right? A. Yes, that's right. Q. Did that include National Guard pilots? A. Yes, it did. When the project first started checking on saucers, we were naturally anxious to get hold of one of the things. We told the pilots to do practically anything in reason, even if they had to grab one by the tail. Q. Were any of those planes armed? A. Only if they happened to have guns for some other mission, like gunnery practice. Q. We've heard of one case where fighters chased a saucer to a high altitude. One of them emptied his guns at it. A. You must mean that New Jersey affair. The plane was armed for another reason. Q. No, I meant a case reported out at Luke Field. 3 fighters took off, if the story sent us is correct. Apparently it made quite a commotion. That was back in 1945. A. It might have happened. I don't know. Q. What was this New Jersey case? A. I'd rather not discuss any more cases without having the books here. Q. Has Project Saucer released its secret pictures? A. What pictures? There weren't any that amounted to anything. Maybe half a dozen. They didn't show anything, just spots on film or weather balloons at a distance. Q. In the Kenneth Arnold case, didn't some forest rangers verify his report? A. Well, there were some people who claimed they saw the same discs. But we found out later they'd heard about it on the radio. Q. Didn't they draw some sketches that matched Arnold's? A. I never heard about it. Q. I'd like to go back to the Mantell case a second. If Venus was so bright, remember Mantell thought it was a huge metallic object. Why didn't the pilot, who made the search later on? A. Well, it was Venus, that's positive. But I can't remember all the details without the case books. Q. One more question, Major. Have any reports been received at Wright Field since Project Saucer closed? There was a case after that date, an airliner crew. At this point, Major Jesse Stay broke in. It's all up to the local commanders now. If they want to receive reports of anything unusual, all right. And if they want to investigate them, that's up to each commander. But no Project Saucer teams will check on reports. That's all ended. There at the last, it had been a little like a courtroom scene, and I was glad the interview was over. Major Boggs was unruffled as ever. I apologized for the barrage of questions, and thanked him for being so decent about it. It was interesting, getting your viewpoint, he said. He smiled, still the courteous Sphinx, and went on out. After Boggs had left, I talked with General Smith alone. I told him I was not convinced. I'd like to see the complete files on these cases I mentioned, I explained. Also, I'd like to talk with the last commanding officer or senior intelligence officer attached to Project Saucer. I'm not sure about the senior officer, General Smith answered. He may have been detached already. But I don't see any reason why you can't see those files. I'll phone Wright Field and call you. I was about to leave, but he motioned for me to sit down. I can understand how you feel about the Mantell report, General Smith said earnestly. I knew Tommy Mantell very well. And Colonel Hicks is a classmate of mine. I knew neither one was the kind to have hallucinations. That case got me at first. You believe Venus is the true answer? I asked him. He seemed surprised. It must be, if Wright Field says so. When I went back to the press branch, I asked Jack Shea for the case report summaries that Boggs had mentioned. He got them for me, 2 collections of loose-leaf mimeographed sheets enclosed in black binders. So these were the secret files. Across the hall, in the press room, I opened one book at random. The first thing I saw was this. A meteorologist should compute the approximate energy required to evaporate as much cloud as shown in the incident 26 photographs. Photographs. Major Boggs had said there were no important pictures. I tucked the binders under my arm and went out to my car. Perhaps these books hinted at more than Boggs had realized. But that didn't seem likely. As liaison man, he should know all the answers. I was almost positive that he did. But I was equally sure they weren't the answers he had given me. Chapter 18. That night I went through the Project Saucer summary of cases. It was a strange experience. The first report I checked was the Mantell case. Nothing that Boggs had said had changed my firm opinion. I knew the answer was not Venus, and I was certain Boggs knew it, too. The Godman Field incident was listed as Case 33. The report also touches on the Lockbourne Air Base sighting. As already described, the same mysterious object, or a similar one, was seen moving at 500 miles an hour over Lockbourne Field. It was also sighted at other points in Ohio. The very first sentence in Case 33 showed a determined attempt to explain away the object that Mantell chased. Detailed attention should be given to any possible astronomical body or phenomenon which might serve to identify the object or objects. Some of the final project report on Mantell has been given in an earlier chapter. I am repeating a few paragraphs below to help in weighing Major Boggs's answer. These are official statements of the project astronomer. On January 7, 1948, Venus was less than half its full brilliance. However, under exceptionally good atmospheric conditions, and with the eye shielded from the direct rays of the sun, Venus might be seen as an exceedingly tiny bright point of light. It is possible to see it in daytime, when one knows exactly where to look. Of course, the chances of looking at the right spot are very few. It has been unofficially reported that the object was a Navy cosmic ray balloon. If this can be established, it is to be preferred as an explanation. However, if reports from other localities refer to the same object, any such device must have been a good many miles high, 25 to 50, in order to have been seen clearly, almost simultaneously, from places 175 miles apart. This absolutely ruled out the balloon possibility, as the investigator fully realized that he must have considered the spaceship answer at this point is strongly indicated in the following sentence. If all reports were of a single object, in the knowledge of this investigator, no man-made object could have been large enough and far enough away for the approximate simultaneous sightings. The next paragraph of this Project Saucer report practically nullified Major Boggs's statement that Venus was the sole explanation. It is most unlikely, however, that so many separate persons should at that time have chanced on Venus in the daylight sky. It seems therefore much more probable that more than one object was involved. The sighting might have included two or more balloons, or aircraft, or they might have included Venus in the fatal chase and balloons. Such a hypothesis, however, does still necessitate the inclusion of at least two other objects than Venus, and it certainly is coincidental that so many people would have chosen this one day to be confused, to the extent of reporting the matter, by normal airborne objects. Farther on in the summaries, I found a report that has an extremely significant bearing on the Mantell case. This was case 175, in which the same consultant attempts to explain a strange daylight sighting at Santa Fe, New Mexico. One of the Santa Fe observers described the mysterious aerial object as round and extremely bright, like a dime in the sky. Here is what the Project Saucer investigator had to say. The magnitude of Venus was -3.8, approximately the same as on January 7, 1948. It could have been visible in the daylight sky. It would have appeared, however, more like a pinpoint of brilliant light than like a dime in the sky. It seems unlikely that it would be noticed at all. Considering discrepancies in the two reports, I suggest the moon in a gibbous phase. In daytime this is unusual and most people are not used to it, so that they fail to identify it. While this hypothesis has little to correspond to either report, it is worth mentioning. It seems far more probable that some type of balloon was the object in this case. Both the Godman Field and the Santa Fe cases were almost identical, so far as the visibility of Venus was concerned. In the Santa Fe case, which had very little publicity, Project Saucer dropped the Venus explanation as a practically impossible answer. But in case 33, it had tried desperately to make Venus loom up as a huge gleaming object during Mantell's fatal chase. There was only one explanation. Project Saucer must have known the truth from the start that Mantell had pursued a tremendous spaceship. That fact alone, if it had exploded in the headlines at that time, might have caused dangerous panic. To make it worse, Captain Mantell had been killed. Even if he had actually died from blacking out while trying to follow the swiftly ascending spaceship, few would have believed it. The story would spread like wildfire. Spacemen kill an American Air Force pilot. This explained the tight lid that had been clamped down at once on the Mantell case. It was more than a year before that policy had been changed. Then the first official discussions of possible space visitors had begun to appear. True's plans to announce the interplanetary answer would have fitted a program of preparing the people. But the Air Force had not expected such nationwide reaction from True's article, that much I knew. Evidently, they had not suspected such a detailed analysis of the God-Man field case, in particular. I could see now why Boggs, Jesse Stay, and the others had tried so hard to convince me that we had made a mistake. It was quite possible that we had revived that first Air Force fear of dangerous publicity. But Mantell had been dead for 2 years. News stories would not have the same impact now, even if they did report that spacemen had downed the pilot. And I doubted that there would be headlines. Unless the Air Force supplied some convincing details, the manner of his death would still be speculation. Apparently I had been right. This case was the key to the riddle. It had been the first major sighting in 1948. Project Saucer had been started immediately afterward. In searching for a plausible answer, which could be published if needed, officials had probably set the pattern for handling all other reports. Explaining away would be a logical program, until the public could be prepared for an official announcement. As I went through other case reports, I found increasing evidence to back up this belief. Case 1, the Muroc Air Base sightings, had plainly baffled project men seeking a plausible answer. Because of the Air Force witnesses, they could not ignore the reports. Highly trained Air Force test pilots and ground officers had seen 2 fast-moving silver-colored disks circling over the base. Flying at speeds of from 300 to 400 miles an hour, the disks whirled in amazingly tight maneuvers. Since they were only 8,000 feet above the field, these turns could be clearly seen. It is tempting to explain the object as ordinary aircraft observed under unusual light conditions, the case report reads. But the evidence of tight circles, if maintained, is strongly contradictory. Although Case 1 was technically in the unexplained group, Wright Field had made a final effort to explain away the reports. Said the Air Materiel Command. The sightings were the result of misinterpretation of real stimuli, probably research balloons. In all the world's history, there is no record of a 300-mile-an-hour wind. To cover the distance involved, the drifting balloons would have had to move at this speed, or faster. If a 300-mile wind had been blowing at 8,000 feet, nothing on Earth could have stood it. Muroc Air Base would have been blown off the map. What did the Muroc test pilots really see that day? While searching for the Chiles Whitted report, ran across the Fairfield-Swaysan Mistral-Light case, which I had learned about in Seattle. This was case 215. The Project Saucer comment reads,
If the observations were exactly as stated by the witnesses, the ball of light could not be a fireball. A fireball would not have come into view at 1,000 feet and risen to 20,000. If correct, there is no astronomical explanation. Under unusual conditions, a fireball might appear to rise somewhat as a result of perspective. The absence of trail and sound definitely does not favor the meteor hypothesis, but does not rule it out finally. It does not seem likely any meteor or auroral phenomenon could be as bright as this. Then came one of the most revealing lines in all the case reports. In the almost hopeless absence of any other natural explanation, one must consider the possibility of the objects having been a meteor, even though the description does not fit very well. One airbase officer I recalled had insisted that the object had been a lighted balloon. Checking the secret report from the Air Weather Service, I found this. Case 215. Very high winds 60 to 70 miles per hour from southwest, all levels. Definitely prohibits any balloon from southerly motion. This case is officially listed as answered. In Case 19, where a cigar-shaped object was seen at Dayton, Ohio, the project investigator made a valiant attempt to fit an answer. Possibly a close pair of fireballs, but it seems unlikely. If one were to stretch the description to its very limits and make allowances for untrained observers, he could say that the cigar-like shape might have been illusion caused by rapid motion, and that the bright sunlight might have made both the objects and the trails nearly invisible. This investigator does not prefer that interpolation, and it should he resorted to only if all other possible explanations fail. This case, too, is officially listed as answered. Case 24, which occurred June 12, 1947, 12 days before the Arnold sighting, shows the same determined attempt to find an explanation no matter how far-fetched. In this case, two fast-moving objects were seen at Weiser, Idaho. Twice they approached the Earth, then swiftly circled upward. The project investigator tried hard to prove that these might have been parts of a double fireball. But at the end, he said, in spite of all this, this investigator would prefer a terrestrial explanation for the incident. It was plain that this report had not been planned originally for release to the public. No project investigator would have been so frank. With each new report, I was more and more convinced that these had been confidential discussions of various possible answers circulated between Project Saucer officials. Why they had been released now was still a puzzle, though I began to see a glimmer of the answer. The Childs-Whitted sighting was listed as Case 144. As I started on the report, I wondered if Major Boggs's bolide answer would have any more foundation than these other astronomical cases. The report began with these words: "There is no astronomical explanation if we accept the report at face value. But the sheer improbability of the facts as stated, particularly in the absence of any known aircraft in the vicinity, makes it necessary to see whether any other explanation, even though far-fetched, can be considered." After this candid admission of his intentions, the project consultant earnestly attempts to fit the two pilots' spaceship description to a slow-moving meteor. "It will have to be left to the psychologists," he goes on, "to tell us whether the immediate trail of a bright meteor could produce the subjective impression of a ship with lighted windows. Considering only the Childs-Whitted sighting, the hypothesis seems very improbable." As I mentioned in an earlier chapter, observers at Robins Air Force Base, Macon, Georgia, saw the same mysterious object streak overhead, trailing varicolored flames. This was about 1 hour before Childs and Whitted saw the onrushing spaceship. To bolster up the meteor theory, the project consultant suggests a 1-hour error in time. The explanation: the airliner would be on daylight saving time. If there is no time difference, he proceeds, the object must have been an extraordinary meteor, in which case it would have covered the distance from Macon to Montgomery in a minute or two. Having checked the time angle before, I knew this was incorrect. Both reports were given in Eastern Standard Time, and in a later part of the project report, the consultant admits this fact. But he has an alternate answer. If the difference in time is real, the object was some form of known aircraft, regardless of its bizarre nature. The bizarre nature is not specified, nor does the Project Saucer report try to fit the Robbins Field description to any Earth-made aircraft. The airbase observers were struck by the object's huge size, its projectile-like shape, and the weird flames trailing behind. Except for the double-deck windows, the airbase men's description tallied with the pilot's. With the ship at 5,000 feet or higher, its windows would not have been visible from the ground. All the observers agreed on the object's very high speed. Neither of the Project Saucer alternate answers will fit the facts. 1. The 1-hour interval has been proved correct. Therefore, as the project consultant admits, it could not be a meteor. 2. The Robbins Field witnesses have flatly denied it was a conventional plane. The Air Force screened 225 airplane schedules and proved there was no such plane in the area. No ordinary aircraft would have caused the brilliant streak that startled the DC-3 passenger and both of the pilots. Major Boggs's bolide answer had gone the way of his Venus explanation. I wondered if the Gorman light balloon solution would fade out the same way. But the project report on Gorman, Case 172, merely hinted at the balloon answer. In the appendix, there was a brief comment. Note that standard 30-inch and 65-inch weather balloons have vertical speeds of 600 and 1,100 feet per minute, respectively. In all the reports I have mentioned and on through both the casebooks, one thing was immediately obvious. All the testimony, all the actual evidence was missing. These were only the declared conclusions of Project Saucer. Whether they matched the actual conclusions in Wright Field's secret files, there was no way of knowing. But even in these sketch reports, I found some odd hints, clues to what project officials might really be thinking. After an analysis of 2 Indianapolis cases, one investigator reports, barring hallucination, these 2 incidents in 17, 75, and 84 seem the most tangible from the standpoint of description of all those reported and the most difficult to explain away as sheer nonsense. Case 17, I found, was that of Kenneth Arnold. But in spite of the above admission that this case cannot be explained away, it is officially listed as answered. Case 75 struck a familiar note. This was the strange occurrence at Twin Falls, Idaho, on which True had had a tip months before. A disc moving through a canyon at tremendous speed had whipped the treetops as if by a violent hurricane. The report was brief, but one sentence stood out with a startling effect. Twin Falls, Idaho, August 13, 1847, the report began. There is clearly nothing astronomical in this incident. 2 points stand out: the sky blue color and the fact that the trees spun around on top as if they were in a vacuum. Then came the sentence that made me sit up in my chair. Apparently, it must be classed with the other bona fide disk sightings. The other bona fide sightings? Was this a slip? Or had the Air Force deliberately left this report in the file? If they had, what was back of it? What was back of releasing all of these telltale case summaries? I skimmed through the rest as quickly as possible, looking for other clues. Here are a few of the things that caught my eye. Case 10. United Airlines report. Despite conjectures, no logical explanation seems possible. Case 122. Holloman Air Force Base, April 6, 1948. This was the Commander McLaughlin White Sands report. No logical explanation. Case 124. North Atlantic, April 18, 1948. Radar sighting. No astronomical explanation. Case 127. Yugoslav Greek frontier, May 7, 1948. Information too limited. Case 168. Arnhem, The Hague, July 20, 1948. Object seen 4 times, had 2 decks and no wings, very high speed comparable to AV-2. Case 183. Japan, October 15, 1948. Radar experts should determine acceleration rates. Case 188. Goose Bay, Labrador, October 29, 1948. Not astronomical, picked up by radar. Radar experts should evaluate the sightings. Case 189. Goose Bay, Labrador, October 31, 1948. Not astronomical, observed on radar scope. Case 196. Radar scope observation, object traveling directly into the wind. Case 198. Radar blimp moving at high speed and continuously changing direction. Case 222. Furstenfeldbruck, Germany, November 23, 1948. Object plotted by radar DF at 27,000 feet. Short time later circling at 40,000 feet. Speed estimated 200 to 500 miles per hour. Case 223. 17 individuals saw and reported object. Green flare. All commercial and government airfield questioned. No success. Case 224. Las Vegas, New Mexico, December 8, 1948. Description exactly as in 223. Flare reported traveling very high speed. Very accurate observation made by 2 FEI agents. Case 231. Another glowing green flare just as described above. Case 233. Definitely no balloon. Made turns, accelerated from 200 to 500 miles per hour. Going back over this group of cases, I made an incredible discovery. All but 3 of these unsolved cases were officially listed as answered. The 3 were the United Airlines case, the White Sands sightings, and the double-decked spaceship report from The Hague. Going back to the first report, I checked all the summaries. 9 times out of 10, the explanations were pure conjecture. Sometimes no answer was even attempted. Although 375 cases were mentioned, the summaries ended with case 244. Several cases were omitted. I found clues to some of these in the Secret Air Weather Service report, including the mysterious green light sightings at Las Vegas and Albuquerque. Of the remaining 228 cases, Project Saucer lists all but 34 as explained. These unsolved cases are brought up again for a final attempt at explaining them away. In the appendix, the Air Material Command carefully states, "It is not the intent to discredit the character of observers, but each case has undesirable elements and these can't be disregarded." After this perfunctory gesture, the AMC proceeds to discredit completely the testimony of highly trained Air Force test pilots and officers at Muroc. The 300 to 400 miles per hour research balloon explanation. The AMC then brushes off the report of Captain Emil Smith and the crew of a United Airline plane. On July 4, 1947, 9 huge flying discs were counted by Captain Smith and his crew. The strange objects were in sight for about 12 minutes. The crew watched them for the entire period and described them in detail later. Despite Project Saucer's admission that it had no answer, the AMC contrived one. Ignoring the evidence of veteran airline pilots, it said, "Since the sighting occurred at sunset when illusory effects are most likely, the objects could have been ordinary aircraft, balloons, birds, or pure illusion." In only 3 cases did the AMC admit it had no answer. Even here, it was implied that the witnesses were either confused or incompetent. In its press release of December 27, 1949, the Air Force had mentioned 375 cases. It implied that all of these were answered. The truth was just the reverse, as was proved by these casebooks. Almost 200 cases still were shown to be unsolved, although the real answers might be hidden in Wright Field files. These 2 black books puzzled me. Why had the Air Force lifted its secrecy on these case summaries? Why had Major Boggs given me those answers when these books would flatly refute them? I thought I knew the reason now, but there was only one way to make sure. The actual Wright Field files should tell the answer. When I phoned General Sari Smith, his voice sounded a
No, I didn't say that. But they're short of personnel. They don't want to take them again, the general said finally. Call me sometime next week. I said I would and hung up. The message from right field hadn't surprised me. But Smith's changed manner did. He had sounded oddly disturbed. While I was waiting for right field's answer, Ken Purdy phoned. He told me that staff men from Time and Life magazines were seriously checking on the Little Men story. Both Purdy and I were sure this was a colossal hoax, but there was just a faint chance that someone had been on the fringe of a real happening and had made up the rest of the story. The key man in the story seemed to be one George Kohler of Denver, Colorado. The morning after Purdy called, I took a plane to Denver. During the flight, I went over the Little Men story again. It had been printed in over 100 papers. According to the usual version, George Kohler had accidentally learned of 2 crashed saucers at a radar station on our southwest border. The ships were made of some strange metal. The cabin was stationary, placed within a large rotating ring. Here is the story as it was told in the Kansas City Star. In flight, the ring revolved at a high rate of speed, while the cabin remained stationary like the center of a gyroscope. Each of the 2 ships seen by Kohler were occupied by a crew of 2. In the badly damaged ship, these bodies were charred so badly that little could be learned from them. The occupants of the other ship, while dead when they were found, were not burned or disfigured, and when Kohler saw them, were in a perfect state of preservation. Medical reports, according to Kohler, showed that these men were almost identical with Earth-dwelling humans, except for a few minor differences. They were of a uniform height of 3 feet, were uniformly blonde, beardless, and their teeth were completely free of fillings or cavities. They did not wear undergarments but had their bodies taped. The ship seemed to be magnetically controlled and powered. In addition to a piece of metal, Kohler had a clock or automatic calendar taken from one of the crafts. Kohler said that the best assumption as to the source of the ships was the planet Venus. When I arrived at Denver, I went to the radio station where Kohler worked. I told him that if he had proof that we could print, we would buy the story. As the first substantial proof, I asked to see the piece of strange metal he was supposed to have. Kohler said it had been sent to another city to be analyzed. I asked to see pictures of the crashed saucers. These too proved to be somewhere else. So did the queer space clock that Kohler was said to have. By this time I was sure it was all a gag. I had the feeling that Kohler, back of his manner of seeming indignation at my demands, was hugely enjoying himself. I cut the interview short and called Ken Purdy in New York. "Well, thank God that's laid to rest," he said when I told him. But even though the Little Men's story had turned out as expected, a dud, Kohler had done me a good turn. An old friend, William E. Barrett, well-known fiction writer, now lived in Denver. Thanks to Kohler's gag, I had a pleasant visit with Bill and his family. On the trip back, I bought a paper at the Chicago airport. On an inside page, I ran across Kohler's name. According to the AP, he had just admitted the whole thing was a big joke. But in spite of this, the Little Men's story goes on and on. Apparently, not even Kohler can stop it now. Chapter 19.